The music faltered for half a second, barely noticeable to anyone except the man standing still at the edge of the ballroom. Zahar Petrov did not move when Madison laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It wasn't careless either. It was the kind that slipped out when someone was trying too hard to pretend they were fine. Her head tipped back just slightly, her dark hair brushing the bare line of her shoulders as another man's hand rested at her waist. The lights above the marble floor caught the movement, turning it into something intimate, almost defiant. Around them, the party continued to breathe. Crystal glasses clinked. Silk dresses whispered. Power dressed itself in polite smiles and expensive suits. No one noticed the sudden stillness radiating from Zahar Petrov. No one, except the men who worked for him. They felt it the way animals sensed an approaching storm. Zahar's gaze stayed fixed on the couple at the center of the floor. He didn't frown. He didn't scowl. His expression remained unreadable, carved from the same cold control that had earned him his reputation. But something had shifted behind his eyes, something sharp, calculating. Madison didn't see him yet. She was focused on the man dancing with her. Alexei, she thought his name was. Someone safe. Someone smiling too much. Someone who didn't look at her like he could see the fractures beneath her skin. The music swelled again, and Alexei spun her gently. Applause broke out from the surrounding guests, impressed by the elegance of it. Madison followed the movement, automatically, muscle memory guiding her steps. She had learned long ago how to play the role expected of her. Smile. Move. Don't think too much. Don't feel. But the moment she completed the turn, her eyes lifted and collided with Zahar Petrov's. Her breath caught. It was irrational. She didn't know him personally. Not really. She knew his name the way everyone in certain circles did, spoken quietly with caution. The Russian. The one who never raised his voice. The one who never needed to. She had noticed him earlier, of course. It was impossible not to. He stood apart from the crowd, tall and immaculately dressed in black, his presence bending the atmosphere around him. Men deferred without realizing they were doing it. Women looked and quickly looked away. But she hadn't expected that look. His attention wasn't casual. It wasn't curious. It was focused, heavy, as if the rest of the room had ceased to exist. Madison's steps faltered for half a beat. Alexei felt it and tightened his grip slightly. "You okay?" he asked, leaning in, his voice warm and unaware. She forced herself to nod, the practiced smile returning to her lips. Yes, just distracted. She told herself not to look again. She failed. Zahar had not looked away. Something in her chest tightened, a sensation she didn't have a name for. Not fear. Not exactly. It was more like being seen when she hadn't agreed to be. The song ended to polite applause. Alexei released her reluctantly, offering a grin. "Drink." Madison nodded again, grateful for the excuse to break eye contact. As they moved toward the bar, she felt it, Zahar's gaze following her. Not predatory. Possessive wasn't the right word either. Intentional. At the bar, she accepted a glass she didn't really want and took a small sip, more for appearance than taste. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored wall, composed, elegant, untouched. No one could see the effort it took to maintain that illusion. "Enjoying the party?" Alexei asked. "It's impressive," she replied, neutral, safe. "This world isn't usually open to outsiders," he said lightly. "You must have a powerful sponsor." The word landed heavier than he intended. Madison's fingers tightened around the glass. "I suppose." She didn't elaborate. She never did. Her past was a series of locked doors, and she had learned which ones never to open. Across the room, Zahar accepted a drink from one of his men without taking his eyes off her. He didn't drink it. "She's with Volkov's associate," someone murmured beside him, careful, quiet. Zahar said nothing. His mind was already working, filing details away with ruthless efficiency. The way she carried herself, too controlled for someone who belonged in this world. The way her smile didn't reach her eyes. The brief flash of something raw when she'd met his gaze. and the way she had danced with another man. It shouldn't have mattered. He told himself that. He had no claim, no history, no reason. And yet, something deep and unwelcome stirred, pressing against the walls he had built over years of calculated restraint. Madison turned slightly, laughing again at something Alexei said. Zahar's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He set the untouched glass down. The movement was subtle, the effect was not. Conversation near him slowed. One man stopped mid-sentence. Another straightened instinctively. When Zahar Petrov moved, people noticed, even when he didn't intend them to. Madison sensed the shift before she saw him. The air felt different, heavier, charged with something unspoken. She turned and found him standing a few feet away. Up close, he was more imposing than she had expected. Not because of size alone, though he was tall and broad-shouldered, but because of the stillness. He didn't fidget, didn't fill the space with unnecessary words. His eyes were a pale, icy gray. "Madison," he said. Just her name, no introduction, no question. Her heart stumbled. "Yes." Alexei glanced between them, confused. "Do you too?" "You can go," Zahar said calmly. It wasn't a command. It was worse. It was an assumption. Alexei opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Something in Zahar's gaze shut him down before the words formed. With an awkward laugh, he stepped away, muttering something about checking on a friend. Madison stood there, pulse racing. "I didn't realize you knew me," she said, lifting her chin. Zahar studied her for a moment, as if weighing how much truth to offer. "I know enough." "That doesn't explain why you interrupted my conversation." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." Silence stretched between them, thick and deliberate. The music resumed, but it felt distant now, like noise from another room. "Did I offend you?" Madison asked quietly. Zahar's eyes flicked briefly to the dance floor, back to her. "You danced with another man." Her brows knit together, disbelief flashing across her face. "That's hardly a crime." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "In my world, everything is context." "And in mine," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I dance when I'm asked." Something passed between them then. Recognition, challenge, curiosity edged with something more dangerous. Zahar leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Be careful whose invitations you accept." Madison held his gaze, refusing to step back. "Be careful what assumptions you make about me." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Around them, the party slowly returned to life, unaware that something irreversible had already begun. Zahar straightened first. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, Madison." He turned away without waiting for a response, leaving behind a silence that clung to her long after he disappeared into the crowd. Madison exhaled shakily. She didn't know why her hands were trembling. She only knew that the party no longer felt safe, and that dancing with another man had cost her something she hadn't even realized she was about to lose. The night did not end when Madison left the ballroom. It followed her. The sound of the music stayed lodged somewhere behind her ribs as she stepped into the cool night air, the city lights blurring for a moment as she forced herself to breathe normally. Her driver opened the door without comment, as trained as everyone else in this world to notice everything and say nothing. Madison slid into the back seat and stared out the window as the car pulled away from the estate. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened glass, composed, elegant, untouched. No one would guess that her pulse was still racing, that her thoughts refused to settle. Zahar Petrov. She had known his name long before tonight. Everyone did. He existed as a rumor before he existed as a man, spoken of in lowered voices, associated with words like control, inevitability, and silence. She had expected cruelty, maybe arrogance. She had not expected restraint, or the unsettling sense that he had seen something in her she had spent years hiding. She closed her eyes briefly, replaying the moment their gazes had locked. The way the room had seemed to tilt, as if gravity itself had shifted. It meant nothing, she told herself. It couldn't. This world thrived on misinterpretation, on people reading too much into glances and gestures because they wanted power to have a human face. She was tired of it, tired of being a piece on someone else's board. By the time she reached her apartment, the resolve had hardened inside her. Whatever Zahar Petrov thought he had seen, whatever assumptions he had made, they were his problem. She would not let herself become another orbit in a powerful man's universe. Across the city, Zahar stood alone in his private office, the noise of the party long faded. The lights were low, the walls lined with books he rarely read anymore. His phone lay untouched on the desk, screen dark. He had dismissed his men an hour ago. He needed the silence. Madison's face intruded into his thoughts with irritating persistence. The way she had looked at him, not fearful, not impressed, but wary, as if she had learned long ago that attention was rarely harmless. That recognition had struck something uncomfortably close to memory. He poured himself a drink and finally took a sip, the burn sharp and grounding. He did not indulge often. Control mattered. Control was survival. And yet, tonight, control had slipped. He had crossed the room without planning to, had spoken her name without considering how he knew it, had felt something dangerously close to irritation at the sight of another man's hand at her waist. It was absurd. He had buried worse instincts than that. But he could not dismiss the feeling that this encounter was not finished, that Madison's presence in his world was not accidental. Too many lines converged there, Volkov's associate, her sudden appearance at events she didn't quite belong to, the careful way she avoided giving anything away. He picked up his phone and sent a single message. Find out everything. The days that followed unfolded with deceptive normalcy. Madison returned to her routines, meetings, charity appearances, carefully curated conversations that never revealed more than necessary. She told herself she had succeeded in putting the party behind her. Until she began to notice the changes. A familiar car parked across the street a little too often. Invitations arriving with names she didn't recognize, but signatures she did. Doors opening more easily. Obstacles quietly removed. Zahar Petrov never appeared. And that somehow was worse. She felt him in the negative space, in the way the world subtly rearranged itself around her. It made her skin prickle with unease. She had learned to survive by staying beneath notice, by never becoming interesting enough to attract the wrong kind of attention. This was attention. One afternoon, she arrived at a gallery opening she had been pressured to attend. The space buzzed with money and pretense, the art more valuable for its exclusivity than its meaning. Madison moved through the room with practiced ease, offering polite smiles, careful words. Then she felt it again. That same shift in the air. She turned. Zahar stood near the back wall, hands in his pockets, observing the room as if it were a puzzle he had already solved. His presence anchored the space, drawing invisible lines of deference. Conversations softened around him. Their eyes met. This time, he didn't look away. Madison's first instinct was to leave. Her second, more stubborn one, was to stay exactly where she was. She had spent too much of her life reacting to powerful men. Not tonight. She crossed the room toward him, each step deliberate. When she stopped in front of him, she realized how close he was, how solid. He smelled faintly of cedar and something darker, unfamiliar. "You have a habit of appearing uninvited," she said quietly. "I was invited," he replied. "You were expected." Her jaw tightened. "I don't appreciate being monitored." His gaze sharpened slightly. "You're not." "That's not how it feels." Zahar studied her, as if reassessing. "This world watches everyone, Madison. You're not special." The words should have reassured her. Instead, they stung. "Then why are you here?" she asked. A pause, fractional, intentional. "Because you are out of place," he said finally. Her breath caught. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you don't belong to Volkov," he said. "I know you don't enjoy these events. I know you learned to smile before you learned to trust." Silence pressed in around them. Madison forced herself not to step back. "And what does that make me to you?" Something unreadable crossed his face, an unresolved question. She huffed a quiet, humorless laugh. "I'm not a problem for you to solve." "No," he agreed, "you're not." The music shifted, the crowd flowing around them like water around stone. For a moment, it felt as if they were alone. "You shouldn't have danced with him," Zahar said. There it was again, that edge. Madison's eyes flashed. "You don't get to dictate my choices." "I don't," he said calmly, "but choices have consequences." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Is that a threat?" His gaze held hers. "It's a warning." Anger flared, sharp and immediate. "I have spent years surviving warnings from men who thought they knew what was best for me. Forgive me if I don't find that comforting." Something in her words landed. She saw it in the way his posture shifted, subtle but real. "You misunderstand me," he said. "I'm not trying to protect you from yourself." "Then from what?" she challenged. "From me," he almost said. Instead, he straightened. "Enjoy the evening, Madison." He stepped away, leaving her with a storm of emotions she had no desire to untangle in public. She watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of frustration and something far more dangerous. Curiosity. That night, Madison dreamed of locked doors. Zahar appeared in her dreams too, always on the other side of them, always silent. Weeks passed, tension stretching like a wire pulled too tight. They crossed paths more often now, always in public, always surrounded by others. Their conversations remained brief, charged with unspoken meaning. Neither yielded ground. Zahar watched her carefully. He noted how she navigated the world, how she listened more than she spoke, how her strength was quiet but unyielding. He admired it against his will. Madison, for her part, found herself noticing things she didn't want to notice. The way he never touched anyone unnecessarily. The way people listened when he spoke, not because he demanded it, but because his words carried weight. The restraint beneath the power. It unsettled her. One evening, circumstances forced them into proximity neither could avoid. A private dinner arranged to smooth tensions between factions. Madison attended as part of a delegation she couldn't refuse. Zahar was already seated when she arrived. The table was long, the lighting low. She took the empty seat across from him, acutely aware of every eye flicking between them. Conversation resumed, cautious and formal. As the night wore on, the talk grew heavier, the stakes clearer. Madison listened, piecing together implications others missed. When she spoke, it was to ask precise questions, to clarify details that mattered. Zahar noticed. When the dinner finally ended, the guests filtered out in clusters. Madison gathered her things, intent on leaving without incident. "Walk with me," Zahar said quietly as she passed. It was not a request. She hesitated, then nodded once. They moved through the corridor together, footsteps echoing softly. "You shouldn't be here," he said without preamble. "I could say the same to you," she replied. He stopped, turning to face her. "This situation is volatile. Volkov is losing patience." "I'm aware," she said. "I'm not as naive as you think." "I don't think you're naive," he said. "I think you're exposed." Her chest tightened. "I can handle myself." "I don't doubt it," he said, "but handling yourself has a cost." She looked at him then, really looked. At the lines of tension he carried like armor, at the weight of responsibility etched into his stillness. "What do you want from me?" she asked softly. Zahar was silent for a long moment. "Distance," he said finally. The word struck harder than she expected. "Then stop following me," she said, anger flaring again to mask something else. "I can't," he replied. "Why?" "Because you're already in too deep." She shook her head, stepping back. "I won't be managed, not by you, not by anyone." Zahar didn't stop her when she walked away. But as he watched her go, Something settled into place inside him with cold certainty. Distance was no longer an option. And Madison, whether she wanted it or not, was standing at the center of a storm that was only beginning to form. The wire between them stretched tighter still, and neither of them knew which one would snap first. The first sign that everything was about to break came quietly. Madison noticed it in the absence. For weeks, Zahar Petrov had been a constant pressure at the edge of her awareness, not always visible, but always present, doors opening, warnings delivered with maddening restraint, his gaze finding her across rooms filled with power and pretense. He had been there like a shadow that never quite touched her, but never let her forget it existed. Then, suddenly, he was gone. No sightings, no subtle interventions, no carefully worded cautions. The invitations still arrived. The meetings still happened. But the invisible hand that had been guiding danger just far enough away was no longer there. Madison felt it immediately. The city seemed sharper, louder. Conversations carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Men lingered too long when they spoke to her. Questions were asked twice, then a third time as if they were looking for cracks. She told herself she was imagining it. She had learned to survive by trusting her instincts, but also by questioning them. Panic made liars of even the most intelligent minds. Still, unease settled deep in her bones. The confirmation came 3 nights later. She was leaving a small charity event, one she had insisted on attending despite the growing tension, when her driver stiffened behind the wheel. The car slowed slightly. "Miss," he said carefully, "we're being followed." Her heart dropped, but her voice stayed calm. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Madison didn't turn around. She stared straight ahead, forcing herself to think. "Take the long route," she said. "Don't speed, don't acknowledge them." The car wove through traffic, the city lights streaking past. At first, she thought it worked. Then a second car appeared, then a third. Her pulse hammered. This wasn't coincidence. Her mind raced, assembling fragments she hadn't wanted to see before. Volkov's impatience, Zahar's warnings, the way he had said she was exposed. The car slowed abruptly as traffic thickened. That was when the sound came. A sharp crack, not loud, controlled. The rear window shattered inward. Madison screamed as the driver swerved, glass spraying across the back seat. The car lurched forward, tires screeching. Another crack, the side mirror exploded. This was no warning. This was escalation. "Get down," the driver shouted. Madison ducked, heart pounding so hard she thought it might tear her apart. The world reduced itself to noise and motion and fear. She curled inward, arms over her head, breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She thought, absurdly, of Zahar. Of his voice, calm, controlled. "You're already in too deep." The car slammed into something and stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then chaos. Hands yanked the door open, rough voices. Someone dragged her out, her heels scraping uselessly against the pavement. She struggled instinctively, but she was no fighter, not like this. A hood came down over her head. Darkness swallowed her whole. When Madison came to, the first thing she noticed was the cold. Concrete pressed against her back. The air smelled damp, metallic. Her wrists ached, bound tightly behind her. Her head throbbed. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. Panic would not help her. She listened instead. Voices echoed somewhere nearby. Male, Russian. She caught fragments of conversation, the cadence familiar enough to chill her blood. She knew who had taken her. Volkov. The realization settled with brutal clarity. She wasn't collateral damage. She was leverage. Her breathing steadied as fear gave way to anger. She had been careful. She had kept her head down. She had trusted that distance would keep her safe. It hadn't. Footsteps approached. A door opened. Light spilled into the room, blinding after the darkness. Madison squeezed her eyes shut, then forced them open. The man who stepped inside was not Volkov himself. He was younger, lean, his expression bored in the way of someone doing an unpleasant but routine job. "Well," he said in accented English, "you've caused quite a mess." Madison lifted her chin. "If you're looking for Volkov, I'm afraid you've misunderstood my importance." He laughed softly. "On the contrary, you're very important, just not to us." The door closed again, plunging her back into dimness. Time stretched. She didn't know how long she was left alone. Long enough for fear to creep back in, insidious and whispering. Long enough for regret to coil tight around her ribs. She thought of Zahar again. Of how she had pushed back against his warnings. Of how she had demanded autonomy in a world that punished vulnerability. If she survived this, she would never make that mistake again. The door opened again, harder this time. Madison looked up. Zahar Petrov filled the doorway. For a heartbeat, she thought she was hallucinating. He stood perfectly still, his face carved from stone, his eyes burning with something she had never seen there before. Not cold calculation. Fury. Relief hit her so hard it nearly broke her. Her breath hitched, a sound she couldn't suppress. Zahar crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped to one knee in front of her, hands already working at the restraints. His touch was careful, precise, as if he were afraid she might shatter. "I'm here," he said quietly. The ropes fell away. Madison's arms burned as blood rushed back into them. She barely noticed. She lunged forward instead, gripping his jacket with shaking hands. "I told you to stay away," she whispered, anger and fear tangling together. "I told you I could handle it." Zahar's jaw tightened. "This is on me." She pulled back slightly, confused. "What?" His hands framed her face, firm but gentle, forcing her to look at him. "Volkov didn't target you because you're weak," he said. "He targeted you because of me." The words hit like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice barely steady. "I underestimated him," Zahar said. "I thought I could contain the situation quietly. I thought keeping my distance would keep you safe." "You disappeared," she said, hurt flaring hot and unexpected. "I thought you'd abandoned me." His eyes darkened. "I was dismantling his network." The weight of that settled slowly. "You did all of that without telling me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because if he believed you mattered to me, he would use you." His voice dropped. He was right. Silence fell between them, thick and fragile. Madison searched his face, seeing something raw beneath the control for the first time. Guilt, self-reproach, fear he had never allowed himself to feel. "You don't get to decide what I can face alone," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "and I was wrong." The admission cost him. She could see it. Footsteps echoed outside the room, voices raised. The tension snapped taut. "We need to go," Zahar said, helping her to her feet. He draped his jacket around her shoulders without thinking, anchoring her with warmth and weight. "Now." They moved quickly through corridors that smelled of oil and rust. Madison stumbled once, and Zahar caught her instantly, his grip solid and sure. Gunfire echoed in the distance, brief, controlled bursts, not chaos, precision. Zahar's men. The reality of who he was and what he commanded struck her anew. This was not a man who reacted. This was a man who planned. They reached a vehicle waiting in a hidden garage. Zahar ushered her inside, then followed, closing the door with finality. Only when the car was moving did he turn to her fully. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, adrenaline still flooding her system. "No," shaken, angry. He nodded once. "You should be." Her eyes burned. "You don't get to sacrifice me for strategy." "I never would," he said fiercely. "That's why this happened, because I tried to remove you from the board instead of trusting you enough to stand beside me." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Madison looked down at her trembling hands. "I don't want to be anyone's weakness." "You're not," Zahar said immediately. "You're my responsibility." That's not better, she shot back. His gaze held hers, unflinching. Then you're my equal. The admission cracked something open inside her. She swallowed hard. Volkov won't stop, she said. No, Zahar agreed. This was his last move. Her chest tightened. What does that mean? It means there's no going back, he said. Not for either of us. The car sped through the city, leaving the darkness behind. Madison leaned back against the seat, exhaustion finally seeping in. Her body shook now that the immediate danger had passed. Zahar reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. His grip was steady, grounding. She didn't pull away. I was so afraid, she admitted quietly. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a small, intimate gesture. I know. For the first time since she'd met him, his voice wasn't guarded. It was bare. I should have trusted you, he said. I should have told you the truth. Madison closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his presence. You still might lose me. His hand tightened. I won't. Not a promise, a vow. The city lights blurred past as something irrevocable settled between them. Lines had been crossed, truths exposed. The careful distance that had defined their connection was gone. What remained was fragile, dangerous, and undeniably real. And neither of them could pretend anymore that they could walk away unscathed. The days that followed did not return to normal. There was no normal left to return to. Madison woke in a quiet room that was not hers, wrapped in linen that smelled faintly of cedar and something unmistakably Zahar. The windows were tall, reinforced, letting in pale morning light without offering a view of the street below. For a moment, disorientation took hold, then memory rushed back in, sharp and unforgiving. The gunfire, the hood, his voice saying, I'm here. Her chest tightened as she sat up, every muscle sore with delayed shock. She was alive, safe for now, but safety felt different than it once had. It no longer meant distance. It meant proximity to danger, measured and controlled. The door opened quietly. Zahar stepped inside. He had removed his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up, dark circles faint beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept, not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. You should still be resting, he said. Madison met his gaze steadily. I've done enough lying down for one lifetime. A corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile, but something close. Fair. He crossed the room, stopping a respectful distance away, as if unsure whether proximity would comfort or overwhelm her. The restraint was intentional. She noticed it. Volkov, she asked. Gone, Zahar replied. Not dead, displaced. His influence dismantled. He won't come for you again. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Madison exhaled slowly, tension she hadn't realized she was holding loosening its grip. You're sure? Yes. She searched his face. And what does that cost you? He didn't answer immediately. Power always has a cost, he said finally. This one was overdue. Silence settled between them, softer than before. Not charged with threat now, but with consequence. I need to know something, Madison said. Zahar nodded once. Ask. Was any of this, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, avoidable? He didn't pretend otherwise. Yes. The honesty surprised her. I could have trusted you sooner, he continued. I could have told you what you were standing in the middle of. I chose control instead. And that choice nearly destroyed me, she said quietly. Yes. No defense, no justification. That mattered more than an apology. Madison swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, steady despite the lingering tremor in her body. She took a breath, grounding herself. I won't live like a secret, she said. Not yours, not anyone's. Zahar's gaze sharpened, not with anger but with respect. Then don't. You're not offering protection, she continued. You're offering a partnership. If that's not what this is, then we stop now. He stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him. That is exactly what this is. She studied him, this man built of discipline and consequence, who had learned too late that isolation was not the same as strength. "And if I walk away?" she asked. "I won't stop you," he said, "but I won't pretend it won't cost me." The admission was quiet, devastating in its simplicity. Madison looked away, walking toward the window. The city beyond was distant and blurred, like a life she had outgrown. "I've spent so long surviving," she said, "reacting, protecting pieces of myself by locking everything else away." Zahar remained still, listening. "I don't know how to exist in a world where I'm seen," she continued. "Not like this." "You won't be alone," he said. She turned back to him. "That's not a promise you make lightly." "I don't make promises lightly," he replied. "That's why this one matters." Something in her chest eased, just enough to let hope breathe. They did not touch. Not yet. Instead, they sat across from one another later, sharing quiet meals, speaking of logistics and boundaries and futures that were no longer abstract. Zahar explained the reality of his world without glamour or threat. Madison asked questions that cut to the heart of things, refusing to be shielded by ignorance. They negotiated trust the way others negotiated treaties. Carefully, intentionally. Days turned into a week. Madison was given the choice to leave at any time. She stayed. Not because she was trapped. Because she was deciding. The first time she walked beside Zahar into a room filled with people who feared him, the shift was palpable. Conversations paused. Eyes followed. She felt it and held her ground. Zahar did not place a hand on her back. He did not guide or direct. He let her stand on her own. When she spoke, people listened. Not because of him. Because of her. Later that night, on a terrace overlooking the city, the distance between them finally closed. Zahar stood beside her, hands resting on the stone railing, the city stretched out beneath them like a living thing. "You should still be afraid," he said quietly. "I am," Madison replied, "but I'm done letting fear make my decisions." He turned to her then, fully. "I won't ask you to stay." She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I'm not staying for you, I'm staying with you." The distinction mattered. Zahar reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand cupped her cheek, warm and solid, reverent in a way that surprised them both. The touch was not claiming, it was grounding. Madison leaned into it, her eyes closing as something inside her finally rested. When he kissed her, it was unhurried, not desperate, not consuming. Intentional. The kind of kiss built on choice. They did not speak afterward. They didn't need to. The city continued below them, indifferent and vast. Power still existed. Danger still lingered. But something fundamental had shifted. Madison no longer danced to avoid being alone. Zahar no longer watched from the shadows, silent and untouchable. They moved forward together, not toward safety, but toward honesty. And in a world ruled by control and consequence, that was the most dangerous decision either of them had ever made. But neither of them looked back. And before you go, let me tell you something. This story was written for everyone who tried to be strong alone and slowly realized they didn't have to be. If at any point you held your breath, got angry, or silently rooted for them, then we felt this together. Thank you for being here with me. And that's it. Bye-bye for now. Thank you for listening, for feeling every silence and every choice with me. I'll see you in the next story.